What's up, everybody? Matt Kajeski here, back again with the Stokastic DFS channel. And today I'm here to talk about the Thursday night showdown slate. It's Air Force taking on Baylor. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you guys today by No House Advantage. And if you've never heard of No House Advantage, they are bringing a creative spin to player props. A couple ways you can play it. You can play versus the house. That is just like it sounds like. You're making lineups of player props just against the listed lines that the books offer. But they also have pick'em contests. These are tournaments similar to DFS style tournaments where you're playing against other people. They have some massive prizes, up to $25,000 in some of these tournaments. And again, you're just playing versus other people. What you'll do is make a lineup of player props on a confidence interval. Your most confident lineups go at the top, and then it's you versus the other people. Now, these are often overlaying, which is one of the biggest advantages you can take advantage of in DFS. If a tournament is sized for 1,000 people and they have $1,000 up top, even if 500 people enter that contest, they still have to pay out the $1,000, which gives you a huge advantage just competing against less people. And No House Advantage is going to give you a first match deposit bonus up to $50 with your first deposit. Click the link in the video description below to take advantage of that. All right, let's dive into our slate. Single game, Thursday night, we've got Air Force taking on Baylor. Some slate dynamics. The under is taking a ton of money. Air Force has taken a ton of money. Baylor opened around a touchdown favorite. They're now down to -3.5. The total is 43 points. Similar teams in a way, but Air Force, their power-heavy run scheme is via the triple option. Baylor, they're just your more traditional power run team. Air Force, 131st in pace. They are dead last. They pass the ball 11.5% of the time. Their signal caller is Haaziq Daniels, very involved on the ground, 614 yards this year, averages about 61.5 yards per game as a passer on just 6.5 attempts. He's fairly expensive as a captain, but his price is kind of right here. So I kind of want to talk about Haaziq Daniels in conjunction with the running backs. So let's kind of spin this forward to Brad Roberts, whose price is $18,900 on DraftKings, a little cheaper on FanDuel. But I mean, it comes down to this guy's opportunity. He averages 25.7 touches per game. Over the last 4 games, I don't think he's seen a target, but let me double check. I think he saw 1 target this year, which was his first target in his career, which is absurd. But no, he's not coming up with targets for me. All right, we'll talk carries then. He's carried the ball 307 times this year. Over the last 4 games, those counts are 33, 29, 37, and 35. So clearly he has the best opportunity of any back on this slate. Doesn't matter if they're trailing. It's a triple option offense. They're going to run the ball regardless. The problem is pricing. When you use Brad Roberts, you run into salary constraints, and there's not a ton of stone minimum value. We'll talk about the guys you could maybe play down there to make this work if you do captain him. But Haaziq Daniels, if you're captaining him, he gives you a lot more flexibility. And I think you want to play Brad Roberts regardless, but I think the conversation captain versus flex becomes really intriguing because his price is enormous. Your lineups just look a little bit better if you captain some of these tertiary options like Haaziq Daniels. And Haaziq Daniels has upside himself. We've seen it multiple times. Now, beyond that, you have John Lee Eldridge as a change of pace. He's still basically a fullback for this team, but he averages 7.8 carries per game. He's very explosive himself, 58 yards per game, and his yards per carry stats are absurd, but he just won't have the same opportunity. Over the last 4 games, 1 carry, 5 carries, 6 carries, 12 carries. These ebb and flow quite a bit. So you have to worry about that with John Lee Eldridge, but ultimately, for contrarian plays, I think he does make some sense. If you want to go even more contrarian, Emmanuel Mitchell is a player who's going to ebb and flow in carries as well. His over the last 3 games are 10, 8, and 1. So you could be looking at anything from 1 carry up to 10. He's very cheap, though. So one of the stone minimum guys you could potentially look at is Mitchell. Over the course of the year, he averages 4.7 carries per game, 23 yards. I mean, if you do play him, he really makes the rest of your lineup work. So I think it's somewhat interesting. From there, your other rushers are typically going to be like these slot back type players. DeAndre Hughes, he has 9 carries over the last 2 games, plays the slot back position. You're going to see a lot of what he does come in the pass game as well. And he actually is a pretty decent pass game role. Hasn't seen a target over the last couple games, but he did play this role last year in particular, was very important for DeAndre Hughes. So he's another player you could potentially look at 4,800 to save some value here. Otherwise, there's not too much to gather. The other names to mention, like Omar Fata, he's had a couple carries over the last couple games. Hasn't seen any in the last 2, but 4 before that. He's 28 carries on the year. Maybe you could use him as just a dart throw. Again, for large field tournaments, we're kind of looking at who might get into games. Dane Kinnaman's a name to mention. He's been injured this year, plays that slot back role. I don't think he returns, but if he does, he would be in play. He's very expensive. I would rather just play DeAndre Hughes. It's pretty tough. Jet Harris has had a couple carries. Ben Jefferson, a receiver, will get a carry here and there. It's very tough beyond these 3, which again comes down to the point. Air Force runs the same offense, and their players are pretty predictable. Pricing is the issue, and how you attack Brad Roberts, I think, is going to be the biggest key to the slate. At wide receiver, shown on slate, so we got to talk about these guys. The top 2 receivers on the team, like in terms of snaps and routes, are David Cormier and Ben Jefferson. Now, Ben Jefferson's the stone minimum, but he's second on the team in routes, and that is consistent through the last couple of games. He just isn't targeted anywhere near as much as David Cormier. So Cormier, I think, as a player, he's very expensive on this slate. Like, he doesn't have a good run game role, and then the targets are so few and far between. Like, he has exactly 1 target in 3 straight games. He averages 32 yards per game, and I think to play him, you need Baylor to be up significantly if he's going to see like the 6 targets he saw in their 4th most recent game. He's also 7,500, which is a bit troublesome for me. And again, beyond that, Ben Jefferson, in terms of routes run in their 2nd and 3rd, and even 1st most recent game, it's been him consistently. I think that makes the most sense for a punt play among the receivers. Amari Terry, he's the 2nd leading receiver on the team, but he only played 3 snaps in their last game. Jefferson plays well ahead of him. Brandon Ingle, only 10 snaps in their last game. Ben Jefferson plays well ahead of him. I think beyond Jefferson and Cormier, the guy I'll probably play the most of is Caleb Rios, their tight end. He has a very good route share, but he only has 15 yards this year, 6 targets. Again, I would rather play the stone minimum guys than play David Cormier. I would rather play Rios and Ben Jefferson and then just mixing and matching the other guys, probably not getting too much of them altogether. To the Baylor side, 82nd in pace, 43.5% pass rate. Blake Shapen is a game manager. He has 104 rushing yards this year, and he averages 216 passing yards on 28.5 attempts. He's expensive. He's a pure game manager. If you're prioritizing Brad Roberts, Zeke Daniels, I could very easily see leaving him out of lineups. It's not going to be a problem whatsoever. In the run game, this is a disaster. It's essentially a roulette situation. There's no rhyme or reason. It's very much the hot hand. On the year, Richard Reese, their freshman, leads the team with 189 carries, 971 yards. That's 81 yards per game. He's not a pass catcher. And a lot of that opportunity came when other players were injured around him. Craig Williams, otherwise known as Squirrel Williams, has been injured through most of the year. He's back now. He's playing now. That's hurt the role of Richard Reese. And you can see 2 out of the last 4 games, he's been in single-digit carries. The same can be said for Craig Williams. He's either had 5 carries or less or 20 carries or more in the last 4 games, which is insane to say. And I mean, we can look at opponent. When I did this, I didn't really see one way or another this making sense. Like in their last game, Williams 3 carries, Reese 14. That was a 11-point loss to Texas. And you go to the game before that. They play Kansas. Or excuse me, sorry, Texas did that. Wrong team. You go to the game before that for Baylor. They played TCU, single-point game. They lost 29-28 in the last second. Williams outcarried Reese 20-10. So it's like these are competitive games with no rhyme or reason to the carries. And then you throw Quaylon Jones into the mix, who's been their preferred pass-catching back. He's actually 4th on the team in targets. He popped up for a 14-carry game in their last contest, too. Honestly, you're rolling the dice here. These guys are going to be projected fairly even in terms of opportunity. I would prefer to get to Quaylon Jones or Craig Williams solely based on price, but I feel very bad about that because you could see Richard Reese pop up for 25 carries. So playing multiple lineups, my recommendation would be to mix and match. For me, I'm going to try to play the cheaper guys because I don't see there being a strong difference in terms of opportunity. But I'm playing multiple lineups. I'm mixing and matching. I certainly do not want to entirely fade Richard Reese with the potential upside he's shown in the past. At receiver, this should be pretty cut and dry. We have your top 3 guys coming in as Hal Presley, Monterey Baldwin, and Josh Cameron of late. I don't see that changing drastically here or anytime soon. Hal Presley leads the team in targets this year. He's actually tied with Baldwin. The fact that he's tied with Baldwin comes down to just the fact that he stayed healthy, whereas Baldwin's been injured. Otherwise, I think you see Baldwin clearly ahead of him. You can see the efficiency clearly favors Baldwin. Over the last 4 games where they've both been healthy, Baldwin 7.5 targets, Hal Presley 3.8. So Baldwin, I think, is expensive. I would rather play some of the guys we already mentioned. I'd probably rather play a Baylor back, but the upside's there for him. I think he's fine. And once you get to the wide receiver 3 situation, this is where things get a little tricky for Baylor. They've basically changed this position a couple times this year. Right now, Josh Cameron has been handling it. Last 4 games, 92% of routes, 90% of routes, 48%, and 66. So you can see it is not consistent, but he is very clearly the wide receiver 2 or 3, depending on how you view Presley. Again, over the last 4 games, Josh Cameron, 6.3 targets, Hal Presley, 3.8. So why did his routes drop that one game at 48%? Well, Baylor will use 12 personnel at times. Their number 1 tight end is Ben Sims, 3.7 targets per game for him, only 1.8 over the last 4 games. That's a bit of a concern, but you look at the routes for Ben Sims, no issues whatsoever. He's been above 73% in the last 3 games. What Baylor actually did in that game against TCU was they used 2 tight ends. Kelsey Johnson's route rate jumped to 45%, and then the subsequent game, 22%. So you can see that directly affected Josh Cameron in the game where Kelsey Johnson had a big jump. Josh Cameron's routes fell to 48%. When they eased back on the routes for Kelsey Johnson, 22%. Josh Cameron jumped up to 66%. So mix and match those guys how you please. You can see the targets directly affect that. In the game where Johnson played more, 5 targets, Josh Cameron 3. In the game where Cameron played more, 7 targets for Cameron, 1 for Kelsey Johnson. The only other player to mention here, Jalen Ellis had 3 targets in their last game. That was very surprising. His route share was just 20%. I don't think we see a ton of him, to be honest, but just a name to say because he saw 3 targets and he'll be on the field a little bit. But that'll do it for the slate. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. And of course, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel on the way out. You can reach out to me on Twitter if you'd like. I'm at Matt_Gajewski, always willing to chop up the games with anyone. And we'll be covering every single game. So stick around. Otherwise, good luck. We'll see you guys next time.